Good evening. It is so good to be back. J.D. Hayworth welcoming you to this Monday night edition of Newsmax Prime. Of prime interest tonight, a pro-life setback courtesy of the Supreme Court, plus an early sign that the Dems may engender a presidential campaign based entirely on gender. But first, the way I see it, which tonight should really be renamed What I Did on My Summer Vacation. Some of you know because some of you were with Miss Mary and me as we visited Europe and cruised the Danube from Bavaria to Budapest. It was the annual Freedom Cruise sponsored by Freedom Alliance and the National Rifle Association. Now, you and I have talked about Freedom Alliance before. It's the organization that Oliver North co-founded following the First Gulf War, and it has provided millions of dollars in college scholarships to the children of those who made the ultimate sacrifice for our nation. Freedom Alliance also helps veterans who have suffered severe wounds on the battlefield as they readjust to life back home. Colonel North was there on the cruise, of course, with his wife Betsy, as were Dr. Ben and Candy Carson, Newt and Callista Gingrich, and Ed and Ursula Meese. Wayne LaPierre was supposed to join us, but he stayed home to deal with the attack on the Second Amendment, made in the wake of the Orlando terror attack. Since this is the first time you and I have had the chance to talk about Orlando, this is the way I see it. All the talk about gun control and suggestions of a gay romance involving the shooter are being employed by the left to try and obscure the fact that this was a terror attack conducted by a radical Islamic extremist, just as the White House tried to tell us that a YouTube video was to blame for Benghazi. Now our agitator-in-chief tries to blame guns when he can't or won't put the blame on Islamic terror. One of the most popular discussions on our cruise involved former Attorney General Meese, former Speaker Gingrich, and David Keene of the Washington Times, remembering the late Justice Antonin Scalia. We miss Justice Scalia, who will be remembered for his legal scholarship, his fealty to the Constitution, and, as the distinguished panel made sure to emphasize, his sense of humor. Certainly, his absence is acutely felt at the Supreme Court, and that's the way I see it. While the late Nino Scalia was indeed one of a kind, the fact is 2 conservative votes were needed today as Justice Anthony Kennedy joined the 4 leftists in handing the pro-life movement a 5-3 setback. Miranda Kahn has more from our newsroom. Miranda?
Thanks, JD. Today's landmark ruling sparked a chain reaction on Capitol Hill, with leaders on both sides of the aisle weighing in. House Speaker Paul Ryan and several GOP lawmakers voiced their disappointment with today's decision. Meanwhile, President Obama, Hillary Clinton, and Senator Bernie Sanders applauded the Supreme Court ruling.
Women won today! Women won today! Women won today!
What was celebrated as a major victory for abortion right advocates,
I want everybody to understand you don't mess with Texas women.
Likewise served as a major setback for the pro-life movement.
Today, babies lost and their mothers lost.
On its last decision day of the year, the Supreme Court ruled 5-3 to overturn a Texas abortion law in what is probably the biggest ruling on abortion in nearly a decade.
This case is huge.
The 2013 Republican-backed Texas law required abortion doctors to have certain admitting privileges in order to treat patients, and clinics to possess hospital-grade facilities. Abortion providers argue the regulations were medically unnecessary and aimed to shut down clinics. In the end, the court weighed in favor of the plaintiffs.
This is a tremendous victory.
We stand here today as members of the pro-life movement saying that we will not give up.
Now, this wasn't the only big Supreme Court ruling today. The court also unanimously voted to overturn former Virginia Governor Bob McDonnell's conviction for federal bribery charges. Now, 2 years ago, the Republican governor was found guilty of taking money and loans in exchange for favors. The high court, though, today threw out that conviction, ruling that his actions did not constitute a criminal act under federal bribery law. Now, today's decision could open the door to new challenges involving other political corruption cases. JD, back to you.
Thanks very much, Miranda. A reminder is in order at this point. We'll be taking your calls for the next hour at 1-877-NEWSMAX. That's 1-877-639-7629. Your chance to offer your comments and maybe ask a couple of questions tonight here on Newsmax Prime. Again, the number 1-877-NEWSMAX. Now, for more on the court and possible political fallout, we're pleased to be joined by our panel. First, via Skype from Utica, New New York, pollster John Zogby. John's senior partner at John Zogby Strategies, also director at the Keenan Center for Entrepreneurship and Ethics at his alma mater, Lemoyne College. And John is the author of the brand new book, We Are Many, We Are One, Neo-Tribes and Tribal Analytics in 21st century America. Also joining us via Skype from Northern Virginia, presidential historian and Reagan biographer Craig Shirley. Craig, the president of Shirley and Bannister Public Affairs, and of course he's also the author of Last Act, The Final Years, an Emerging Legacy of Ronald Reagan. Gents, as always, thanks for your time on Newsmax Prime. Craig, we'll get to Governor McDonald's case in just a few minutes. As a Virginian, I'd be interested in your perspective. But first, let's talk about the abortion decision involving Texas. What effect will that have overall on the election this November?
Well, I think it's probably in the initial phase, JD, it's going to demoralize pro-life supporters, but they'll regroup. They always do. As John will tell you, is that the pro-life community has actually been marginally more energized in past federal elections over the last 10, 15 years, in that more pro-lifers vote on this single issue than pro-choice people do. So I would think that it will initially and probably in the long term help Donald Trump, not hugely, but marginally.
Yeah, to the extent, and John Zogby, we will talk about the presidential polls, but the whole notion of the composition of the court, does this just reinforce that for an election year issue?
Oh, most certainly does. It is an issue, continue to be an issue. Regarding pro-life, I think that even in the short run, the pro-life movement gets energized by this decision. What happens is that whichever side is responding to some sort of cataclysm, that's the side that tends to be highly energized and to get out there and vote. Of late, the pro-choice movement has been winning the intensity battle, and the Supreme Court makeup has certainly been an issue in their favor. But I think this is the sort of decision today is the sort of thing that'll light a stick of dynamite.
Let's go to the phones. Cincinnati, Ohio, appropriately enough, is where we find Lynn. Lynn, a major Democrat rally in your town tonight. Did you call in to talk about that, or what's on your mind?
Actually, I was calling in to make a comment about the abortion decision. I think it's a shame that it went the way it did. And I know a lot of women think that they have this right to do what they want with their own body, but I think what people forget is this fetus, what they want to call it, but really a child, is a distinct body from the mom. And really you're harming that baby. And when you think about it, there could be circumstances, I think, where someone that has been subject to a crime like rape or incest or things like that, where perhaps that's an appropriate step to take because of the trauma of that crime. But generally speaking, if a woman wants to have rights over her body and decisions over her body, she has a decision she could have made before the conception of that baby.
Lynn, that point is well taken, and we appreciate your perspective from Cincinnati tonight. And I mentioned Cincinnati not only because Lynn called in, but earlier today, Hillary Clinton and Elizabeth Warren were on the campaign trail there together. Obviously, they had a very different take than did our caller about the Supreme Court decision, but it was Elizabeth Warren going after Donald Trump. Take a listen.
What kind of a man roots for people to lose their jobs, to lose their homes, to lose their life savings? I'll tell you what kind of a man. A small, insecure money grubber who fights for no one but himself. Donald Trump says he'll make America great again. It's right there. No, it's stamped on the front of his goofy hat. And watch out, because he will crush you into the dirt to get whatever he wants.
All right, so Elizabeth Warren there, who, of course, Donald Trump pointed out via tweet that she basically lied about her heritage, thus the nickname Pocahontas. Let me talk to the panel. And John Zogby, let me come to you, not so much with the campaign rhetoric, that's inevitable, but I got to talk to you about the polling that is out. We only have a couple of minutes left. This huge discrepancy in a couple of weekend polls. The Washington Post ABC News poll has a huge lead for Hillary Clinton, 51-39%. But then you take a look at the new NBC News Wall Street Journal poll, and Mrs. Clinton is only up by 2 points, 46-44. John, there's been a lot of complaining about the sample utilized by the Washington Post and ABC News.
Yeah, there has been, and with good reason. You know, fortunately, none of these polls are calling the election right now. But the bottom line is, when you look at the aggregation of the polls that include outliers, but generally, you know, they line up. What you show is a very slight lead for Hillary Clinton nationally. I think ominously for the Democrats, even at a low point for Donald Trump, with some of the things he has said in the last couple of weeks, it's very, very close. In fact, even tied in many of the battleground states.
And we will have to keep our eye on that tie in the battleground states. I promised we'd give Craig Shirley a word as a Virginian on the overturning of, or the conviction being vacated by the court involving former Governor McDonnell. You got 20 seconds, Craig.
I'm reminded of what Ray Donovan said, Ronald Reagan's former labor secretary, who was acquitted of all egregious charges brought against him. And he said, where do I go to get my reputation back? And I feel it's very bad. We have an out-of-control Justice Department. They proved it with their illegal prosecution of Senator Ted Stevens, and they proved it again today by going falsely after Bob McDonnell.
Fair enough, guys. I want you both to come back, and when we come back, we'll discuss Brexit with yet another panelist. Stay tuned.